Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here chairing this event today, and it is my absolute privilege to have the opportunity to chat with Toni Jaeger-Fine of Fordham. Toni, you're so welcome, and you know, your reputation precedes you, really. I feel that I can't do justice to you, but you know, I think just to start off with telling us a little bit about your journey in terms of your career would be a great way to set the scene for this discussion, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, Karyn. And I just want to say that the honor is really, truly mine. And to be able to speak to this group and share my insights and my experiences is really such an honor and a pleasure. And I want to thank you all. So I was born and raised in a suburb of New York City. I went to college in upstate New York. As you may know, in the US, we go to college before we go to law school. Then I went to law school in Duke, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And then I practiced law, which is probably the part you're most interested in after this, as opposed to what happened when I was a child. I went to practice law in Washington, D.C., where I was a litigator. And I did a combination of commercial litigation and administrative litigation, which I think the latter is really sort of what's exciting about being in DC, is doing things that are sort of DC centric. So I was administrative litigator. And then I decided that I really wanted to teach. And it's funny because my parents were both public school educators. And I think that's something that I always wanted to do, but they sort of pushed me towards a profession. I'm thrilled that they did. I started teaching as an adjunct legal writing instructor, and then I moved back to New York, started at NYU as an instructor in their first year JD skills program called the lawyering program. And then I got involved in global work. And that has been really the greatest blessing and privilege and honor and pleasure of my entire life, to work with international students, judges, lawyers from around the world, first at NYU, then at Cardozo Law School, and for the last 16 years at Fordham.
Wow, what a brilliant CV. And, you know, we're here today to celebrate International Women's Day and to talk about diversity and inclusion. And Toni and I were chatting earlier in the week, and the one thing I think we were agreed on was that we didn't want this to be just another diversity event, that we wanted to kind of go beyond the usual conversation around diversity. And where I think we'll kick off, Toni, if I may, is with the whole question of access, because I think this is a really interesting topic. And just to set that in context for all the participants, when we talk about having a diverse organization, and particularly diverse leadership within an organization, there are, I think, some stereotypes around how people go about that. The first thing people think about is gender, and that's really important. But obviously diversity and inclusion is so much wider as a topic. But what I'm interested in here is the question of access. What are the barriers and the boundaries that we place around our organizations that make it hard for people from diverse backgrounds to actually join our organization or to succeed and to progress when they're in the organization? So I thought we'd start off with that, Toni, and that whole question of access. What do you think about how do we improve access within organizations?
Yeah, Karyn, I'm probably going to come up with a pretty inadequate answer, because I think if I knew the answer to that, I think the world would be a better place. But it's such a challenging yet crucial issue, and we're all facing it. And I think, first of all, the first thing I want to say is thanks for the question. The second thing I want to say is I think the environment globally is much more favorable right now, in that everyone at least is focused on this, or at least they're saying they're focused on this. And that is a really important first step, to acknowledge that we have a problem. You know, the whole Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I have a problem, I'm an alcoholic, we have a problem, we are not diverse enough. And I think stepping up, admitting that we have a problem, is a really, really important first step, even if second steps and third steps are a little bit harder to come by. I think, you know, Karyn, we were talking about this earlier in the week, but the sort of, you know, still, I am guilty of this. When I think of a lawyer, who comes to mind is sort of the straight, white, middle-aged male in a suit and tie. And that image is really something that has been, those of us of a certain age at least, this is the image of a lawyer. I think in order to increase diversity, as we must, we have to start really, really early at the recruiting stage, or even before the recruiting stage. So law schools in the US, this is probably true around the world, are trying to recruit people from very diverse backgrounds. We and others have established pipeline programs for historically underrepresented or excluded groups. I was privileged to teach in a pipeline program last year for mainly undergraduates of color who really don't have the right role models, don't have the right support networks. And the network is something that's really, really important. I think many of us have mentors, many of us have people that our families know who maybe helped put us in a position where we could at least understand the reality of being a lawyer, even imagine it for ourselves, where there are so many people from different backgrounds who don't think that it's even a reality or a possibility for them. And that's a real problem when you think about all that talent that is lost because someone just doesn't even imagine that she could be a lawyer. I think really mentorship is very important. We tend to mentor those who look like us and have similar backgrounds, and that's obviously a real problem. The same is true of sponsorship. So if we have, and I'm speaking for the US right now, a situation, and I think this is probably true in many other places, but US is the market I know best, where you have, men of a certain age in leadership positions, and maybe 90 to 95% of leadership positions, they are mentoring, they are sponsoring people that look like them because they're comfortable with them. And it's not even intentional, it's just a product of what we do as humans. I think the flexibility that we see coming into the profession now will help attract women and other underrepresented groups enormously. I think we have to check our own biases. I'm going to admit something that I told Karyn privately the other day, but I think it's really important for me to admit this. I had a meeting a few weeks ago with someone, and I want to be very, very careful how I speak here, who had a very strong Brooklyn accent. And this person is very, very, very well educated, extremely, has had a brilliant career in both the public sector and the private sector as an attorney. It's hard to think of someone more accomplished than this individual. And the Brooklyn accent was actually distracting to me. And it was an opportunity for me to check my own biases and think about how I react to people, despite enormous evidence of success and competence and brilliance and everything else. But to say, why am I distracted by this accent? Get over it. And it made me think about what other biases do I carry around in my life? And really, I don't really know how to guard against implicit biases. But I think once we recognize we have them, we could fight not to not confirm them and to really separate ourselves from them.
I think that's a really interesting observation, Toni. And I suppose I come at this with a bit of a vested interest in terms of my own experience, because I'm the first generation in my family to go to university. And, I didn't have access in an automatic way or in any kind of an obvious way when I was starting out. And I shared with you the other day, but I think it's illustrative. When I talk about the barriers that are in place, one of the barriers for me was that I didn't know how to dress for the office. And it seems like such an obvious thing that, of course, you know how to dress for the office, but I didn't. I had no idea. And I had a few days when I wasn't really dressed right for the office. And there was a partner in the firm that I trained in who used to say, "What is she wearing?" And I would hear this and then would learn that, okay, this particular ensemble is just not quite right, and I'm going to have to go and put something else on. And, when I think back to that, and I think about young people, particularly coming into our firm, into our organization, do they perceive barriers around things like our expectations of what they will look like, what they will sound like, as you have said, how they dress, whether they went to the right school, whether they went to the right college? And it's so important that senior people like me in our organizations are thinking about how we can dismantle some of these barriers, because we're missing out potentially on really good talent because the barriers are in place.
Yeah, Karyn, the first thing I want to say is hats off to you. I don't know if that's an expression that translates to other countries, but you know, I grew up in a solidly upper middle class. Like, my disadvantage was I didn't have lawyers in my family, but I had every other advantage. And I recognize that. And I want to take a moment to appreciate that, because I don't think until relatively recently I was fully aware of how much that advantage helped me, and how lucky I was to have a family that pushed me in the direction of professionalism, that had sort of, you know, master level degrees, and that understood and that motivated me and provided the resources for me to do everything with relative ease. And I understand that that is not the case for everyone. And so, Karyn, for you to come from that background and end up as a partner in one of Dublin's premier firms, or if not the premier firm, is really just extraordinary. And, you know, I don't know that I would have had the strength, the courage, the wherewithal to do that. I'll never know, but I can easily imagine that I would not have. So I want to applaud you and everyone in that situation. You know, but I think it's really true. And one of the things that I always think we need to do is go into high schools and sort of send several messages. I should never box myself in by saying two, but several messages. One is, you can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. And let's bring in some people to show you that, you know, you can look like this and make it. And I think there is a level, at least in the US, I think this is hopefully true in other places, there's more of a level of flexibility with how your hair is, and what kind of makeup you wear, and what kind of jewelry you wear. You know, I have a guy on my team, a young guy, he's doing his JD, and I think he's got an earring, I'm not sure, but he's got this head full of hair and it looks kind of crazy. He used to be a very clean cut Marine, and now he's got this this man bun on his head, and he still managed to land a position at one of the premier US firms. And I was really happy about that, because we had a conversation about whether he needed to cut his hair. And I told him, go where you could keep your hair the way you want it to be. And I think there's that flexibility, but young people do need to understand sort of the limits of that. And I think it's really incumbent on us to go in and help educate people about, in the interview process, and when you're junior, here's how you dress, and here's how you could dress in a way that looks professional, even if you don't have a lot of money to spend. You know, it doesn't have to be a fancy designer suit, but it has to fit you, and you have to have a clean shirt, and you have to, you know, meet certain basic standards. But I think sort of getting people to understand the basic requirements, and really showing them, and really going to places that we wouldn't normally go. In our case, in New York, inner city schools, right? We should be visiting inner city schools and letting them know the basics, how you write an email, how you put your resume together. I met some JD students last year who didn't know how to do a resume. They were from historically underrepresented groups. And I said to a colleague who was running the program, I said, hey, we got to really show them how to do a resume, because their resume just wasn't going to get them very far. And to think of these very, very basic things that to us seem basic, I should say, but not to others, and really sort of, but also let them explore their authenticity, because what we don't want to do is whitewash everything. And what we don't want to do is create expectations that everyone's going to fit the old mold, which will really, in the end, hold us back a bit.
And I'm interested in that word authenticity that you use, Toni. So let's just talk about that for a moment, because I do think this is a really important element of having a diversity strategy that's actually working, as opposed to being lip service to diversity. So how do you ensure that people can be their authentic selves in a workplace where traditionally there are expectations around what the members of the club, if I can call it that, look like? You know, the pale, male and stale, with apologies, who meets those criteria. You know, authenticity is so important.
It's so important. And we spoke about this a little bit earlier in the week. And I have to admit that I used to think authenticity was sort of a trap, and it wasn't really meaningful. And I've come around to really understanding the importance of authenticity. and in ways that I didn't. And I'm sorry that I didn't catch on a little bit sooner. I think I just misunderstood the concept. And I do think others misunderstand the concept. But what I think is important about authenticity, and then let me talk about how to get there. What's important about authenticity, I think, because it wasn't clear to me, so it may not be clear to everyone, is that when you're not authentic, you're spending a lot of time and energy sort of covering up for something. And being someone you're not. And that energy could just much better be used on things that are effective, practical, helpful, and productive. And so when you spend time keeping a secret, as it were, not being authentic, that is really time and energy that is completely wasted, and nobody likes that. And so I think the way to tackle that is to send messages about, we don't care what you look like. We don't care how you dress within reasonable standards. We don't care that you have a bizarre character that's a little bit different, which is for sure true of me. And, I was not a particularly good fit in corporate law firm America, even in my firm, which was my firm was a spin-off of a major US-based firm in a time when spin-offs were not common at all. So it was sort of a young, funky firm, but still I was kind of an oddball in many ways. And I think the best way to signal that is to have people who don't fit the mold in leadership positions. And it can't just be sort of, oh, we have a chief diversity officer who's a person of color. Hooray. But it has to be really on the management committee, on the executive committee, on the hiring committee, people who are people of color, women certainly, people who are gay or trans or whatever it may be, religious minorities, right? The firms really need to show that you can not only be what you are, but you can be what you are and rise to the top levels. And I think we do not see enough of that. We still do see many, many leadership positions held by, I like that pale male, what is it? A pale male stale? I like that. I never heard that before.
Absolutely. And, it's a real challenge, speaking as a partner in a law firm where we really do struggle to promote women. That's the first thing. I suppose Ireland is a slightly unusual example in terms of ethnic diversity, because we've had very limited ethnic diversity as a country, although that is now growing. And it's very important that we keep an eye on making sure we make room for different ethnicities, both in terms of the firm generally, but also in terms of senior management later on as people come through. But when I joined McCann FitzGerald almost 25 years ago, we had 3 gay partners at that time, which was quite radical at that time. And I remember thinking, wow, this is an amazing culture to be in, because there was no sense of people having to be in the closet. And my experience in Belfast, where I had qualified, was that there was simply no question that anybody would feel they could be openly gay in a law firm in Belfast. So, I think people have different experiences. For me, I have 4 kids. So as a working mom, there are so many challenges, I suppose, in terms of women progressing who have children, because of the timing that, having children tends to coincide with the point where you might be considered for promotion. And the pandemic, Toni, I don't know about in the US, but certainly here, women have been much more impacted by the pandemic than men have. And it's something that we're very conscious of. I don't know if that's a pattern that you've seen in America.
Yes, we have. So I'm laughing a little bit because my personal experience is that although I don't have children, I was impacted really heavily because I have 2 guys on my team who were great fathers and great husbands, and they left me with a lot of extra work because I don't have kids. So yes, women are affected, but I think in general, obviously mothers were affected more than anyone during the pandemic. And at the beginning, people were like, "Oh, this is great. I'm home. I can take care of my kids." But then, of course, it became a nightmare because they were home and they had to take care of their kids all the time, and they didn't have this the childcare arrangements that were traditional, or the schooling for the kids. And so there has been definitely a disproportionate impact on women, especially mothers who were working. And it was just, I think it was really a disaster. And we've seen a huge exodus of women from law firms. And this is exactly the wrong direction to be going in. And, I think firms are also waking up to that. And let me give credit where credit is due. It's not so much, at least in the US, that law firms are so enlightened. It's that their clients are so enlightened. And the clients are really pushing. And my guess is this is true at major firms around the world, is that the clients are really pushing the lawyers in the right direction. And really insisting, at least major clients, that not only can the firm show evidence of diversification and diversity efforts, but that not just that the firm be diverse, but that the team, I want my team, if I'm the GC, I want the team on my matters to represent that diversity across a range of spectra. And I think that is what is really pushing firms and to embrace these initiatives. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
I completely agree. And certainly that's my experience. And it's really refreshing, actually. When a GC says, hang on, okay, so we need to bring an expert into this case. I'd like to have a choice, please. And I'd like it to be a diverse choice. So, that really does shake things up. And, on my own team, myself and my partner Audrey that I'm clustered with, we have a policy now that if we're going to instruct, whether it's an expert or a barrister, we still have a split profession. We look at a diverse set of candidates before, rather than just suggesting the obvious person every time. And you kind of force yourself to have the conversation each time. You mentioned, holding on to talent, and the talent wars that are going on at the moment are obviously just a huge challenge for management in law firms around the world at the moment. It doesn't seem to be unique to any particular jurisdiction. How do you attract talent in this type of market, and how do you hold on to your talent?
Yeah, this is a huge challenge. I think in most major jurisdictions in which there are large law firms, and it could also be true in jurisdictions in which there are mainly smaller and mid-sized firms. And I think, I just want to share one story that went to something you said earlier, Karyn, about your when you joined the firm so many years ago, and there were three gay lawyers who were out. It mirrors my experience a little. I was interviewing for a summer associate position. I guess it was in the fall of 1984 for the summer of 1985. And I was interviewed by a Black woman partner. And I said, okay, this is where I want to be. I didn't know there were Black female partners at the time. And I was just bowled away by her. And she was she passed away recently. She was an incredible woman, a real force. Yeah. And I thought, wow, what a firm. This is where I want to be. And that's the only firm I've ever worked at. But how do you recruit and retain talent? First, I think this is a very, very difficult question. First, New York firms have been doing it with money. You might have been reading that a first-year associate salary is now at least a number of firms, I don't know, $220,000, $225,000. This is obviously an extraordinary amount for people who don't know anything, although they are clearly going to be working very hard and not have a lot of flexibility in their lives. I think one approach is money, but I don't think it's the best approach because I don't know where this ends. Clients are unhappy about it. And I think if anybody thinks that in their first year they're going to earn $225,000 without working for it, I think it really leads to, it's not a great thing for associates. I think DE&I, whether you're a diverse candidate or not, the DEI and other ESG initiatives that a firm undertakes and can really, again, not just lip service, but really show we are doing this in pro bono, we are doing this to ensure a diverse set of candidates. We have a woman in leadership roles, we have Black people in leadership roles, we have gay and trans people and religious minorities in leadership roles. I think these are the things that really attract people. I think what also really attracts this generation, which I think is terrific, is a little bit of a better work-life balance. What I don't know is whether that's possible in a sophisticated law practice. Can you say, as a major law firm, yeah, okay, you only have to bill, you know, you're going to maybe earn only 180,000, but you only have to bill 1,800 hours. Does that work? I don't know if that works when you're representing major clients that have expectations of a certain level of service. And I would love someone to figure out a way to make that happen, to make that work, where it works for the firm, it works for the client, and it works for the associate. But I just don't know how realistic that really is when you're serving highly sophisticated clients in a demanding and very competitive work environment. But I think what this generation really, really values is better work-life balance. And then training and development. Law firms, at least in the US again, are not very good at training and development. They think they're good, they say they're good, they point to stuff. I had a conversation with a woman she's a manager of training and development at McKinsey a couple of weeks ago. And what they do is light years beyond what at least US law firms do in terms of training and development. And I think that training and development really needs to be focused on ways to keep diverse talent. A very good friend of mine, a Black woman, just left her firm at the worst possible time for the firm. She was a fourth-year litigation associate. That is not a good time to lose someone. And she just felt like she was kind of used as the poster child, put on sort of diversity committees, burdened with that extra tax, but not really trained. She said in her exit interview, she told me, and I believe her because she's very outspoken, she told them she learned nothing in the last year. That is unacceptable. And that's why she left. And that is unacceptable.
You know, that's really interesting as an example of getting it wrong. And
what not to do, right?
You know, the question about, is it possible as a law firm to afford flexibility? I think that certainly in an Irish context, that conversation is over. I think we all recognize that we must afford flexibility to our associates, and actually they're more productive and happier when you give them flexibility. So it's good for you, it's good for the clients, and it's good for the associates. Actually making it happen isn't straightforward, but certainly I think I've seen an evolution watching what firms around the world have been doing. I think things have evolved. I mean, I can remember in around 2016, I made a visit to Amsterdam to a law firm there where I was setting up a new business area within our firm, and they very generously shared some experience with us. But one of the things they said was, you know, this view that transactions require you to give your life to the job for 6 weeks and you never see daylight and you work overnight and only one person can be the person. They had just moved way beyond that. And their view was, you just need to resource it properly and you need to communicate. So there's no reason why somebody can't do 2.5 days and hand over to somebody else who's going to have 2.5 days. If you communicate effectively, you can make it work. And at the time, I thought it was mind-blowing. But actually, now as I see things evolve, we've all had to recognize that, particularly through the experience of the pandemic, that these things are doable. They just take a lot of coordination and a bit of thought and everybody to be willing to make them happen. So I think that is definitely the way things are going.
You know, Karyn, that's so interesting because lawyers are creative when it comes to legal problem solving and things like that, but we're not very creative when it comes to leadership or management. And we kind of, you know, well, this is the way we've done it for 100 years and I had to do it. And so you have to do it. There are so many sort of institutional things we could change. So I never did deals, but I have enough friends who have to know this kind of, 6 weeks of nothing but being there and you're sleeping in the office and you know, if you're sleeping at all, there has to be a better way. And I think there also has to be a better way than the billable hour model, which is still very much the model in which law firms operate. You know, clients don't care how much time you spend. I mean, they care to the extent that it affects their bill, but there's no more value to something because you spend time on it. And, you know, I think, I'm not sure in my lifetime we see some deviation, of course, from the billable hour model, but I think a complete restructuring is not likely in the next 30, 40, maybe 50 years. but I do think it incentivizes us in ways that are not efficient or healthy. And I would love your thoughts. I know I'm not supposed to be asking you questions, but do you see any change coming to the billable hour model, and would you like to see that?
Well, you know, I'm on the record in the last few years as giving talks on this and saying it's going. It has to go, because it's really not a great measure of value. I think it's a pretty terrible measure of value, actually. And I suppose I'm somebody who's always been slightly disadvantaged by the fact that I do things quickly. And so if you do things quickly, the chargeable hour isn't your friend. So, you know, if you look at this from, I think we have to look at this from the perspective of the client. And from the perspective of the client, actually the chargeable hour doesn't make sense other than if you're a procurement person. And procurement people love the chargeable hour because it's measurable and it allows them to kind of do their bean counting and they can report on things. But fixed fees are very much coming in. I mean, 5 years ago, people would have said you couldn't have fixed fees on a litigation matter. Now, fixed fees are increasingly something that we deal with for litigation. So I think everything's changed. But actually, this all ties in with the topic of diversity and inclusion, because if you can structure things in such a way that you can afford people flexibility and that the chargeable hour is less of a feature and less of a bind, then actually you free yourself up as an organization to do things differently. So I do think that we're going to see massive change on that. And I actually think it'll happen more quickly than you think. So we'll see. Toni, in the time we have left, I want to just ask you about a couple of things. So Bruce Springsteen is on the wall behind you. And I'm a big fan. In fact, his pandemic album got me through the pandemic. But, you know, I'm a big believer that if you're a lawyer and all you know is law, then you're not going to add great value. And I'm interested in your perspective on that. You know, this doing other stuff being an important part of being an effective lawyer. What's your sense of that?
I could not agree more. And thank you for shouting out to my best boy. He has gotten me through my entire life, I would say. His lyrics have been sort of my spiritual guide since I was about 10 years old, and I guess his first albums came out. I think it's absolutely critical, Karyn, and it's something that I didn't always appreciate and didn't always do. And you know, we always talk about what would I tell my younger self, and one of the many things I would tell my younger self if I were to be able to do it all over again is do more things that are not law related. I think it makes you a happier person. I think when you return to your work, you're better engaged. You know, sometimes I say, oh, let me read something. And there I'm sitting on a chair reading some law thing. And I'm thinking, this is not really what I meant or what is meant by getting away from it, right? And so I think it's really, really important to have interests. And I mentioned this to you the other day, I think it's important for your well-being, but I think it also makes you a better lawyer because it allows you to engage creativity more and sort of get your creative juices flowing. And I think it's probably one of the main reasons behind why in the US and perhaps other systems from people who are listening to this, why we have courts of general jurisdiction is that we believe that you can, that there is a cross-fertilization of ideas that comes when you sort of dabble in different things. And I have to say, last night, I went to a film, I went to a 35 millimeter film called The Divorcee. And in this theater where I am right now, and they show these old 35 millimeter films, and I just thought, this is fantastic. This is totally off the norm. I'm learning a different period style, different ways of acting, different cinematography. And it just sort of made my head explode in a really great way. And I think the more you can engage sort of different aspects of you, emotionally, intellectually, but also physically. When I was 57, I started going to a CrossFit gym. And I can't tell you what confidence that gave me. Not because I was good. In fact, I was legendary at my gym because I was so bad. I couldn't lift a barbell over, an empty barbell over my, like everyone knew, oh, that old lady. But you know, that old lady went every day and that old lady did the best she could. And that old lady walked out with her head held high because I felt I felt like a real badass, if I could say that, just by making myself uncomfortable. And doing something you're bad at is actually a really good idea. And just letting yourself explore things is really going to just sort of emotionally, intellectually, physically going to put you in a much better spot.
You officially are a badass, Toni. I'll say that to you. But you know what that point around allowing yourself to be bad at things, we're all really bad at that as lawyers because we're all high performers and we're all obsessed with perfection. But you know, I'm a big believer that embracing failure is an important part. And actually, and this particularly is an issue in terms of diversity with women. Good women rule themselves out of things. And I think part of the reason they rule themselves out is because they're afraid of failure. And I try to encourage the women around me here to embrace the possibility that, you know, they might succeed, but yeah, they might fail. And so what? It's experience.
I mean, the problem, you're exactly right. And I read some studies where, you know, a job posting, let's say, and you're looking at that job posting and you only have, let's say, 5 of the 10 levels of experience that they're looking for. Men will apply even if they have fewer than 5. A woman will not apply even if she has 8 out of 10. And I think this reluctance, this fear of failure, this sort of engagement with perfectionism is doomed to fail, because if you don't experience failure, if you don't push yourself, you'll never know what you're capable of, and you'll stay in this really comfortable job where you could be so much better. And you know, I get the fear of failure because I think I've let go of it to some extent, but I think we're all troubled, especially lawyers, by sort of perfectionism, and we don't want to make mistakes. And when we hear from clients, they're always saying, "Oh, this has to be perfect. If there's a typo, you're gonna lose the $10 million of business we give your firm every year." But you really limit yourself if you're afraid of failure. And if you're, you know, lawyers are trained to be risk averse. That's what we do. We look for risk. We see problems in everything. But if you carry that into your personal life, you know, everything you do is risky. Going to the gym is risky. Going to a new film is risky. Love is risky. Everything is risky. And if you live with that risk averseness in your private life, but also in your professional life, you just have no idea what you're capable of. And I think it's really a problem. And you're right, Karyn, that women in particular are very gun shy when it comes to taking risks. And I love that you encourage your more juniors, your junior women, to just go for it. We've all failed. We've all come out on the other side, and you know, big deal. Nothing happens.
Exactly. And I think, you know, as senior people within an organization like this, you have to make room for the possibility that not everything will succeed, and say that actually, do you know what, that's okay. And that is a bit counterintuitive for lawyers, but you know, I hope we'll do more of it. Toni, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and a privilege for me to have this conversation. I could keep going for at least another hour, but I know that our time is limited, and I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth, I think, to say farewells on behalf of everybody. Is that?
Thank you, Karyn. I'm actually going to hand it over to our co-founder, Gretta Fenner, who is in the room. But before I do that, I must tell you, I am here in Miami, Florida, where it is bright and sunny. And as I take it all in, I am sending light and strength to the people of Ukraine.
Hear, 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 hear. You know, we thought about including that in our topic for today, but it was so big and we are so small that we didn't feel we could do it justice. But there's so many amazing initiatives going on where people are doing their bit for Ukraine, and I wholeheartedly support that.
We're standing with Ukraine. You know, Toni, what a treat to have you in the room. I want to add, as we were talking about the importance of extracurricular activities, how that sparks change. That's the academy. That's why we came together. That's why we're here. This diversity. I, as a non-lawyer, a co-founder of this, and our mission is to learn. Our mission is to have this platform that allows us to see different points of views. So thank you for sharing your experiences. Again, what a treat. And I'm going to hand it over to Gretta Fenner. Thank you. Thank you, Karyn. Thank you, Toni.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I know we're short in time, but I would like to start by referring to what you just talked about, the tragic crisis in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is the result of a total absence of diversity, which is a man which over 20 years increasingly has surrounded himself by people who are exactly like him or do not dare to be even remotely different. And it's the typical Ceausescu syndrome. And that is horrific circumstances, of course, now, but they teach us how dangerous absence of diversity is. And I think that is perhaps almost everything we need to say. I do want to thank you profoundly. You have been, you know, badass. Both of you are clearly badass lawyers, I have to say, and I'm going to try to stop this in a light way, despite my heart being very, very heavy. You talked about accents and how accents can be distracting. And I cannot tell you how enjoyable it is to listen to my favorite accent being the Irish accent and the American accent that I love and know most being the New York accent. So it's only on that basis, it's been wonderful. I would like to suggest authenticity is a real important keyword. And we have to live authenticity and diversity and show that we are diverse. Exactly what you said, Toni. Don't pretend you only read law books, because frankly speaking, I don't even think people only read law books. They just like to show that they only read law books, right? But actually they might actually love to read comic books. Well, stand for that and show that you are a creative, diverse, interesting person. Whether you're a woman, pink or blue in your face, it doesn't matter, just show who you are. And I think we can lead by example. At the Institute, we have perfect gender equality, and I only recently found out, and it was never by design, but I think it is because we profoundly live this kind of authenticity and access. And so thank you, two ladies, you are absolutely awesome role models. And thanks to you, there will be more diversity and more inclusion in this world. But thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The honor has been all mine. And thank you all for hosting us and for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Toni. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Karyn.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye, Lisa. Take care.